I sent $5,000 every month for my niece's college, but her mom blew it on luxury. If there's one thing I've always believed in, it's that family takes care of its own. That's why when my niece Sophie found herself staring down the reality of not affording college, I knew I had to step in. She's the kind of kid who actually deserves a shot. Smart, hardworking, and not the type to waste opportunities. Her parents, my sister Laura and her now ex-husband Derek, had split up last year, and it wasn't pretty. They fought over everything. Who got the house, the car, even the damn dog. But the worst part, Sophie got caught in the middle. The divorce drained what little college savings they had, and by the time the dust settled, there was nothing left for her tuition. She wanted to go to medical school, and without some serious financial help, that dream was dead in the water. My wife and I talked it over while sitting at the kitchen table, coffee going cold in our mugs. We weren't rolling in cash, but we were doing okay. $5,000 a month was a stretch, but we could make it work. It felt like the right thing to do. So, we set up a special account, one that was meant for Sophie's tuition, books, housing, whatever she needed to get through school. She was over the moon, sending me texts about college applications, grants she applied for, and even pictures of potential dorm rooms. Everything seemed to be going exactly as it should. Then little things started nagging at me. Laura, my sister, had been struggling after the divorce. She had a decent job, but nothing that would let her live comfortably on her own, especially after losing half of everything in the split. She used to stress about money all the time, always telling me how hard it was to make ends meet. But lately, she wasn't just getting by. She was thriving. It started small. A new designer bag here, a fancy dinner there. But then it got bigger. Weekend trips to Miami, brand new furniture, a full-blown renovation of her house. She was living way beyond what I knew she could afford. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she got a bonus at work. Maybe she was just treating herself after years of stress. But then, something clicked. The timing. The sudden change happened right after we started sending money for Sophie's college. I told myself I was imagining things. There was no way Laura would touch that money. It was for her daughter's future, not a shopping spree. But the more I saw, the harder it was to ignore. Laura's sudden glow-up wasn't something I could ignore anymore. It wasn't just a couple of nice things here and there. She was on vacation more often than she was home, sipping cocktails by the beach while Sophie was scrambling to figure out her tuition. Her Instagram was practically a travel blog: Hawaii, Aspen, the Bahamas. She even got a new car, a luxury SUV that definitely wasn't in her budget a few months ago. The family started asking questions. My mom, always the blunt one, didn't even try to sugarcoat it. She straight up asked how Laura was affording all this. Her answers were all over the place. One day, she claimed she had picked up a side job. Another time, she insisted she had learned how to budget better. She always had a new excuse, but none of them made sense. Sophie didn't seem to notice at first. She was busy with school applications, working part-time, and trying to figure out where she'd live. But then one night, she called me, her voice a little shaky. She mentioned that her college hadn't received any tuition payments yet. The deadline was coming up, and they were starting to send her warning emails. That didn't sit right with me. I knew for a fact that I had transferred the money every single month like clockwork. That was the moment my stomach dropped. I logged into the account we had set up, expecting to see the balance we'd built up over the past few months. But instead of the tens of thousands that should have been sitting there was barely 1,000 left. For a second, I thought I had misread something. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe I was looking at the wrong account. But as I scrolled through the transactions, my hands started shaking. The money had been going out bit by bit, month after month, until there was almost nothing left. And every time a big chunk disappeared, it lined up perfectly with one of Laura's vacations or a suspiciously expensive purchase. Then it hit me. When we first set up the account, I had given Laura limited access so she could handle payments in case Sophie needed anything urgent. At the time, it made perfect sense. She was her mother, and I figured it would be easier than having Sophie constantly ask me for withdrawals. I never imagined she'd take advantage of that trust like this. I sat there, staring at the screen, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. There had to be some other explanation. But deep down, I already knew Laura had been draining the account, using the money meant for Sophie's future to fund her own luxury lifestyle. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, trying to process what I had just seen. The anger was slow at first, a low burn in my chest, but it grew with every second. I had trusted her. I had done this to help Sophie, not to bankroll Laura's new life. Then, just as I was about to shut my laptop and call it a night, I noticed something else. A name I didn't recognize on several of the transactions. Recurring payments going out to a high-end boutique in New York. Another one to a luxury spa. A third to a private jet service. This wasn't just a few indulgences. This was a full-blown scam, and I was the one paying for it. I clenched my fists, my pulse hammering in my ears. Sophie's future was on the line, and Laura had been throwing away money like it was nothing. I wasn't sure what my next move was, but one thing was clear. This wasn't going to end quietly. I wasn't the kind of guy to sit on something like this. The moment I woke up the next day, I knew exactly what I had to do. Laura and I needed to talk, face to face, without any distractions. I texted her, told her to meet me at the cafe we used to go to as kids. It was the same spot where we had family breakfast growing up, the kind of place that smelled like fresh coffee and syrup, where we used to argue over who got the last pancake. I figured if anything could remind her of who she used to be, maybe this place could. She rolled in 10 minutes late, looking like she had just walked out of some high-end boutique. Sunglasses perched on her head, nails perfectly manicured, an expensive handbag she definitely couldn't afford before. She sat down across from me, plastering on a smile like she didn't have a care in the world. I didn't waste time with small talk. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the printed bank statements, and slid them across the table. For a split second, her face went pale. Then, just as quickly, she straightened up, flipping through the pages like they meant nothing. She let out a scoff and leaned back in her chair. Then came the act. She tried to flip the script, acting like I was the one out of line. Said I had no right to spy on her, that I was trying to control her life. Told me the money was just as much hers as it was Sophie's. Like she had earned it. I clenched my jaw, so tight it hurt. Did she even realize what she had done? Did she even care? I told her point blank. This wasn't about her. This was about Sophie's future, the one she had just torched. That's when the excuses started rolling in. She needed that money for her mental health. Raising a kid alone was stressful. The vacations, the spa treatments, the shopping, those weren't indulgences. They were survival. If she didn't take care of herself, how could she be a good mother? Didn't I understand? Didn't I care about her well-being too? I could barely process what I was hearing. It was like talking to a stranger, not my own sister. But then I hit her with the one thing she wasn't expecting. I told her I was going to tell Sophie. That's when the panic hit. Her whole demeanor changed. The arrogance disappeared in a flash, replaced with pure desperation. She reached for my hand across the table, her voice shaking. She begged me not to do it. Said Sophie would never forgive her, that it would break her heart, that she was already dealing with so much and didn't need another reason to resent her mother. I just sat there, watching her scramble for an excuse, anything that might make this all go away. But the truth was, it was too late. Sophie deserved to know. And Laura? She deserved everything that was coming her way. There was no turning back. Laura had made her choices, and now it was time for Sophie to know the truth. I wasn't going to let my niece's future disappear because of her mother's selfishness. I drove straight to Sophie's school, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind kept replaying every excuse Laura had thrown at me, every desperate plea to keep her secret buried. But I wasn't doing this for Laura. I was doing it for Sophie. I found her in the library, hunched over her laptop, scrolling through college websites. She looked so focused, so hopeful. She had no idea what was coming. When I told her, she froze. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then curled into fists. I watched as the realization hit, the weight of it pressing down on her. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just sat there, staring at the screen like her whole future had just been ripped away from her. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, steady, but there was an edge to it that hadn't been there before. She asked if she could stay with me and my wife for a while, just until she figured things out. I didn't hesitate. I told her she could stay as long as she needed. That night, Laura's fury exploded. She called every relative we had, spinning her own version of the story. I was the villain, the manipulator, the one who was turning her daughter against her. Half the family bought it. I got texts, calls, some accusing me of crossing the line, others just confused, not knowing what to believe. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, messages rolling in one after another. Some relatives were trying to stay neutral, saying it was a family issue and we should handle it privately. Others were outright angry at me for sticking my nose where it didn't belong. It didn't matter. I had Sophie's trust, and that was the only thing that mattered. Then the unexpected happened. My phone rang again, but this time it was Derek, Laura's ex-husband. His voice was tense, controlled. But there was something underneath it, something I hadn't expected. He asked if what Laura had done was true. When I confirmed it, there was silence. Then a single breath, slow and deliberate. And then he said something that made my pulse spike. Derek wasn't just angry, he was livid. He had spent months covering child support, extra costs for Sophie's education, and now he realized Laura had been running a long con. She had come to him over and over, claiming she needed more money for tuition, books, housing, always with a sob story about how tough things were for their daughter. And he had believed her, every single time. Now, with the truth out, he wasn't about to let it slide. The first thing he did was call his lawyer. Within hours, they were pulling every financial record they could get their hands on. Derek wasn't just looking for what Laura had taken from him. He wanted to see the full extent of the damage. Meanwhile, I reached out to my old buddy Oliver, a financial analyst who knew how to dig deep. Within a day, we had uncovered something even worse than we imagined. Laura hadn't just taken money from me. She hadn't just lied to Derek. She had been milking multiple family members, all with the same excuse, Sophie's education. It started with small amounts, a few thousand here, a few thousand there, just enough to make people think they were helping. But over time, it had snowballed into something far bigger. By the time we finished combing through everything, the number we landed on made my stomach churn. $195,000. It wasn't just personal loans either. Laura had gone even further. She had taken out fake student loans under Sophie's name, setting up accounts to make it look legitimate. Some of the money had been funneled through those accounts. Others were wired straight to her personal savings. It was a full-blown scheme, and she had nearly gotten away with it. When I called Derek to tell him what we found, he went quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was ice cold. He wasn't just pressing charges. He was going to make sure Laura faced real consequences. That was when my phone buzzed again. Another relative, this time my cousin Rachel. She had just found out Laura had borrowed money from her, too, under the same pretense. And she wasn't alone. One after another, more calls and texts rolled in. Laura had gone through nearly the entire family, spinning the same story, pocketing cash, and using it for her lavish lifestyle. It wasn't just about money anymore. This was betrayal on a whole different level. And from the way things were unraveling, Laura had no idea just how bad this was about to get. Laura must have realized the walls were closing in. One day, she was still trying to control the narrative, making calls, twisting the story in her favor. The next, she had vanished, off to some high-end wellness retreat that promised deep soul healing and spiritual transformation. It was her classic move, When things got bad, she ran. Before leaving, she made a dramatic post on social media. A long-winded rant about how she had been betrayed by a toxic family member and how she needed to step away for her own well-being. It was all about self-care, finding inner peace, and of course, playing the victim. The post was filled with vague, emotional phrases designed to make people feel sorry for her. She even sprinkled in a few quotes about rising above negativity and choosing self-love. But this time, no one was buying it. Relatives started commenting under her post, sharing their own experiences of how she had manipulated them. One after another, stories poured in. People who had loaned her money, trusted her, and been burned. An aunt mentioned the emergency loan she had given Laura last Christmas. A cousin revealed how Laura had guilt-tripped her into paying off a mysterious medical bill. The more people spoke up, the clearer it became. She had scammed nearly everyone. The floodgates opened. Screenshots of text conversations started popping up, proof of her lies. Relatives who had once stayed silent finally spoke out. Even family friends who had only heard rumors now had confirmation of what was really going on. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about years of manipulation, deceit, and betrayal. Meanwhile, Derek and I weren't wasting time. The financial records were solid. The fake student loans, the misused funds. Everything was documented. We met with his lawyer, going through every piece of evidence, preparing to take legal action. We weren't just going after the money. We wanted full accountability. If she thought she could just disappear and let this blow over, she was in for a rude awakening. A few days later, a mutual friend sent me another post from Laura. She had doubled down, now claiming she was being harassed and targeted by bitter people who couldn't handle her growth. She painted herself as a victim, talking about how she had given so much and was now being unfairly attacked. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so pathetic. But there was no escaping reality this time. She had left behind a paper trail a mile long, and we were about to make sure she couldn't run from it. Laura's attempt to escape reality didn't last long. The lawsuit moved faster than she expected. The financial records, the fake student loans, and the evidence of her fraud were airtight. She had nowhere to hide. When the court date arrived, she walked in looking nothing like the woman who had flaunted designer bags and luxury trips. The confidence, the fake superiority, gone. The judge didn't hold back. This wasn't just a case of a family dispute over money. It was fraud, plain and simple. And when they dug deeper, they found more. Laura had been falsifying financial records for years, even during her divorce. She had hidden assets, manipulated numbers, and created fake debts to milk more out of Derek. She wasn't just a con artist. She was a repeat offender. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the sentence. Laura was ordered to repay everything. But that wasn't all. Given the scale of her deception, she was facing real consequences. Asterisk, asterisk, a short-term jail sentence, asterisk, asterisk for fraud. It wasn't years behind bars, but it was enough to make sure she couldn't just walk away like she always did. Sophie sat beside me, gripping my hand as the verdict was announced. For the first time in months, I saw relief in her eyes. The weight of everything Laura had done to her was finally lifting. Not long after, Sophie made it official. She moved in with my wife and me. The stress, the uncertainty, the constant emotional manipulation from her mother was over. She could finally breathe. Derek worked with his lawyer to reverse every fraudulent loan Laura had taken out in Sophie's name. It took time, but eventually, the banks ruled in Sophie's favor. Every false debt was wiped clean. She wouldn't have to spend the next decade paying for her mother's mistakes. Laura had spent years weaving a web of lies, and in the end, she had trapped herself in it. The damage she had done couldn't be undone overnight, but at least now, the people she had hurt could start moving forward. And as for Laura, she had finally run out of people to con. Sophie was finally free. No more uncertainty, no more financial nightmares hanging over her head. The weight of her mother's manipulation was gone, and in its place was something she hadn't had in a long time: Hope, the college, upon learning the full story, stepped up. They worked with financial aid offices to ensure that Sophie received the grants and scholarships she needed. She wouldn't have to fight for every cent. The family, those who had been deceived by Laura, also rallied behind her. She had spent so long being caught in the middle of the chaos her mother created, and now she was surrounded by support from people who genuinely wanted to see her succeed. I watched as Sophie settled into her new life. She threw herself into her studies, pulling all-nighters, fueled by takeout and too much coffee, making up for the time she lost dealing with her mother's schemes. She found a part-time job in a research lab, the kind of place where people in white coats moved between workstations, talking in rapid-fire bursts about data and results. She fit right in. One afternoon, I stopped by to see her. Through the glass window of the lab, I saw her standing over a workstation, deep in concentration, jotting down notes with the kind of determination I hadn't seen in her before. It hit me then, she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. Meanwhile, Laura had finally run out of ways to escape her own mess. Her sentencing came down hard. The repayment plan she was stuck with was poetic justice. Every month, the exact amount she had spent on her last lavish vacation to the Bahamas was now deducted from her prison wages and court-mandated financial obligations. She had traded luxury resorts for a cramped cell. No designer bags, no weekend getaways, no more manipulating people into giving her what she wanted. The only person left to deal with was herself. Life moved forward. Sophie was on her way to medical school. Derek had fully cleared her name, and as for me, I had done what I set out to do. I had made sure Sophie got the future she deserved. And Laura? Well, for the first time in her life, she was paying the price for everything she had done. Literally,